All right, welcome back to the Caster Desk at the MPL Weekly. If you're just tuning in, every week we're going to be, for the next 5 weeks, we're going to be checking in with our MPL players and seeing what they've done in these pair-ups throughout the week. I'm Becca Scott, Brian Kibler, Cedric Phillips.
That's me.
Yeah, that's you. All right, so we're on to our peril division.
Our perilous group.
Perilous
This division is full of peril.
It is. They all are. Because look at these players. All right, tell me a little about who we got here.
You starting or me, BK?
Go for it.
All right, here I go. BBD, coming off of a mythic championship top 8 in London. I'm going to say finally, only because I know Brian very well, and he's wanted to get that monkey off his back for a while, so congratulations to him. Already a world champion and plenty of accomplishments underneath his belt is where I would start. And then I'm gonna snipe Javier Dominguez as well, who's your reigning world champion, who, by the way, before he won the world championships, the year prior, he lost in the finals to William Jensen. Not a bad 2-year stretch, though I think someone actually has won back-to-back worlds.
Yeah, also in this group, Shahar Shenhar, a back-to-back 2-time world champion, along with Luis Salvatto, who is the reigning player of the year, and then Shi Tian, who is a Hall of Fame member, and Eric Froehlich, another Hall of Fame member, and Cuneo, a long-time top competitive player. And really, I think the sort of dark horse in this group is John Rolf.
Absolutely.
He is a player who sort of had a very strong breakout year last year, but that was really his first presence on the competitive scene.
Yep.
It was good enough to get him into the MPL, so we're going to see if he can keep that momentum going.
Yeah, I agree. Can he make the most of the opportunity? My answer is probably yes.
All right, let's see this head-to-head matchup that we have coming up first, our first featured match. We're going to watch most of that matchup. All right, Shahar Shenhar and Brian Braun-Duin.
Well, I'm going to start with your player on the left here in Shahar Shenhar, who, for my money, has the best picture here of the MPL with those arms crossed. Very tall Magic player indeed, but also a very, very good one. He started winning at a very, very young age at Shahar. Back-to-back World Championship wins is maybe the most impressive Magic accomplishments I've ever seen, but then he kind of slid down a little bit. Maybe got a little bit, I don't want to say cocky, maybe a better word for that, but ultimately those are his words, not mine. He kind of didn't really have himself centered, but he got back to what started working for him. Now the wins are starting to pile in again for one of the younger players of the MPL. I'm excited to watch him play Magic.
Yeah, and Brian Braun-Duin, I love his story, sort of coming up as a lot of people refer to as a grinder. He sort of played on local tournament series like the Star City Games Tour, and was very successful there, but didn't really find success at the pro level. He actually a couple of years ago got the Grand Prix top performer spot at the World Championship from accumulating the most overall points traveling to these Grand Prix across the world, and he converted that into a World Championship.
Yeah.
So he is someone who came from pretty humble beginnings in the sense of sort of the Magic competitive circuit. Really proved himself through the sort of amateur semi-pro circuits, and now won the World Championship, is here in the MPL.
What a matchup. We've got cocky versus humble in your guys' words. And let's see Shenhar's first deck, the Esper Control.
Esper Control, which looks to be a pretty popular deck here in week 1 of the MPL. Again, Eldritch Reborn, Liliana Dreadhorde General are key cards here. The thing about Esper Control is there's a lot of different ways you can go about building it, depending on what you want your Planeswalker spread to be. But I do want to focus on the Eldritch Reborn here, because it's just a one-of, so it may come up in this matchup, it may not, but some players are electing to play it. Some matchups will be very good, other matchups it will be quite poor. We'll see how things do shake out in this matchup, but you see the main deck copies of Cry, you see Absorb, you see Kaya's Wrath, things that we're used to, Chemister's Insight, Searcher's Kanta, Thought Eraser, though I do want to point out only one copy of Narset here. We've seen other styles of decks like this have more copies, and then one copy of Oath of Kaya, our first preview of that card.
And importantly, is this different art for Teferi Hero of Dominaria?
It is.
It's really nice art.
It is. Yes, it is.
All right, let's hop on over to our other deck, Brian Braun-Duin. Braun-Duin it with the Esper mid-range.
Yeah, and this is a deck that Brian had a lot of success with earlier in the year in the previous format, and I actually read an article. I happened to read an article that he wrote talking about this deck, and specifically he was saying, don't play the bad cards, only play the good cards. And that was sort of his mentality surrounding why Esper midrange is now actually a strong deck. Because previously, you had to play some bad cards.
Yep.
You played stuff like Discovery Dispersal. We talked about this a little bit earlier. That you played essentially because of its synergy with Hero of Precinct 1, but now you get to play with more powerful cards. We saw just how powerful Sorin was in that last match we got to watch where Alex Hayne used it in combination. He only has a single copy, but he does have Hostage Taker. He has Despark. He has Enter the God Eternals, Do and Veto. A lot of additional powerful multicolor cards to support that hero.
What's notable about this particular build of this deck is, you mentioned, don't play the bad cards, play all the good cards. He's a little bit bigger here with his Planeswalkers and everything that he's doing. He's still got Hero of Precinct 1 and Thief of Sanity, Hostage Taker, which we didn't see earlier in Esper mid-range when we watched that unfold. He's coming off a top 16 finish at SCG Richmond with this deck. He was even going actually a little bit bigger last weekend at that tournament. Looks like he's changed a couple of cards here, but one thing that we know about Brian is he loves the mid-range strategy. When I talked to him last week about making the top 8 of Mythic Championship 2 in London and doing it with essentially 37 creatures and lands with the human strategy, I was like, is that really how you drew it up in your mind's eye? And he said, well, no, of course not. I would have done it with a mid-range deck. So he is playing a mid-range deck here. This is certainly his wheelhouse, and I'm excited to see how this matchup does unfold. One that is traditionally favored for Esper control, many think.
Now, how important is that Liliana Dreadhorde General? Because I noticed it's the only non-multicolor card, so it must be really good to want to put it in there, right?
Liliana is very powerful, but the problem in a matchup against, say, Esper Control is that Liliana is very expensive.
Yes.
So it's difficult to resolve expensive threats against a deck that is packed full of absorbs and oftentimes even Dovin's vetoes.
Yep.
Even if you try and support your big expensive threat with your own counter magic, sorry, Dovin's veto is not going to allow that.
One thing that's interesting about Liliana, the power level, I mean, we can all read the card. We all know it's very powerful, but is it a main deck card? Is this a sideboard card? How many copies of this card do we play? Remember, this is essentially the first week for these players to figure out these decks and these cards. So we all know Liliana is very powerful, but it's trying to finding out what's the perfect home, what's the perfect number, and is it a main deck or sideboard card? We're going to start to find that out this week and find out more over the next 5 weeks.
And we're about to find out right now. Let's jump into the gameplay. Shenhar versus Braun-Duin.
Well, we're going to take a look at opening hands. This is going to be Esper decks on both sides, so the hands might look a little bit similar as we make our way through the course of these games. Teferi is going to stay on top, it looks like, for BBD, which is not much of a surprise. It's an incredibly powerful card, but Shahar is going to start things off with a Watery Grave that enters the battlefield tapped, and Brian will mimic exactly that.
Yeah,
so we will head back over to Shahar.
Shahar's opening is very strong here.
Yes.
A pair of Thought Erasures and an Absorb. The Thought Erasure allows him to just pick off Hero of Precinct 1 before it gets a chance to come down if he chooses. He could also get rid of the Teferi, but yeah, he's going to go ahead and just take the one card that can currently slip under his counter magic and allow BBD to get a foothold on the game.
Kai's Wrath is the card that's going to actually go to the graveyard from the Surveil. Brian going to play a Glacial Fortress and pass the turn back over to Shahar. Lands aplenty here for Shahar, along with another copy of Thought Eraser and Absorb. So he's just going to leave Absorb up right now. Brian picking up a Hallowed Fountain for his draw step on turn 3. Drowned Catacombs will come down, and we head back over to Shahar. The early stages of this game, Brian, is just going to be a lot of lands and passing back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, these decks are largely defined by their sort of mid-range, late-game plans. The really defining characteristic of Brian's deck is the Hero of Precinct 1, giving the ability to snowball early if it gets down and sticks, and allows you to kind of take the game by control that way. And BBD is going to try and play the Sorin with the threat of getting the hero back, but Shahar does have Absorb to stop that. However, Shahar does know there's Teferi there as well. He however, has his second copy of Thought Erasure that he held for, turns out exactly this. And does pick up a second copy of Absorb as well. So to be able to take the Teferi out of action and then still have Absorb, even if Brian is able to find another threat off the top.
Do a little surveilling. We'll see Shahar play a land here in just a moment that will likely enter the battlefield untapped because his life total is not under duress. Brian with a huge top deck here into Teferi Time Raveler. It's actually going to give him a little something to do. It's unlikely to resolve because of the Absorb that is in Shahar's hand. And there's no guarantee that Brian actually even wants to play it right now. Might instead try to go with Hostage Taker just to get something going on the battlefield.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things about Teferi Time Raveler is that you can use it as a absolute must counter test spell, because we often refer to it as test spells as something that you might want to play that your opponent figure out, do you have counter magic? If you do, maybe you'll use it on this. Teferi is the absolute best case scenario of that, because if they don't, well, they can't have another counter spell.
Correct.
As long as Teferi's in play. They also can't remove Teferi at instant speed, because Teferi absolute locks their ability from being able to actually interact with it outside of their own turn. But Brian does decide to fire it off this turn, and it will get answered by an Absorb. And another Absorb is drawn by Shenhar. And there is a Hostage Taker on board, but that's just 2 damage a turn. That is not going to add up nearly fast enough for BBD to close this game before Shahar can find something. So BBD also is sort of in a position where he needs to draw multiple big threats thanks to the Absorb already in Shahar's hand.
A couple of lands here for Brian. He's going to keep attacking with the Hostage Taker, a card that has a very, very high ceiling in certain matchups. This is not one of them, unfortunately, for BBD. It's just going to be a 2-3. And you see Shahar does have a copy of Kaya's Wrath in hand. He can get rid of this Hostage Taker at his leisure, but right now, Shahar's saying, you know what? I'll take a couple hits. I'll take a couple draw steps. I found something that actually matters here in Teferi Time Raveler, so you know what? Let's make you pick up that hostage taker. I'll draw myself a card, and we'll take care of the hostage taker temporarily that way, as mortifies the draw step here for Brian.
Yeah, and interestingly, just that Teferi, it comes down, it sort of slows things down a little bit, and also prevents BBD from being able to cast any of his counter magic. If he had drawn Absorb this turn, say Shahar picks up some sort of haymaker in the form of Teferi, his other Teferi, or say a Search for Iskanta can come down, no threat of counter magic.
Brian does have that hostage taker back on the battlefield here, but again, take a look at Shahar's hand at this stage. I think Moment of Cravings, an Absorb, a Vraska's Contempt, and now Kai's Wrath is just going to trade 1-for-1 with the hostage taker. Again, Kai's Wrath would destroy everything that's on the battlefield. Everything is just one creature right now. Going to make sure that Teferi Time Raveler still stays and does its thing. And its thing at this stage of things is plussing so that Shahar can play sorceries at instant speed on his opponent's turn, which may come up at some point in this game as a swamp is the draw step.
I think most importantly, Teferi ticking up allows him to just use its minus again and get an additional card, bounce an additional permanent. BBD, he is just sort of flooding out here. One of the major differences between these two decks in terms of this style of matchup is that Shahar's deck has Chemist's Insight. Brian Braun-Duin's deck does not. So this sort of situation, if a player draws Chemist's Insight, it's exceptionally powerful to allow them to get rid of some of the weaker or there it is. As if on cue,
speaking the devil in a
Shahar
child
finds a Chemist's Insight that will allow him to dig deeper into his deck. It also allows him to exchange the Glacial Fortress's hand later for another 2 cards, and finds himself Teferi, and now he's off to the races.
And if one Teferi was good, a second one is very good. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, the more powerful of the two. This is a multi-format staple, but it's definitely going to be very good right now. Teferi Time Raveler here for BBD is going to try to resolve. We'll see if Shahar will let it. Again, looking at a hand of Absorb and Dovin's Veto.
The thing about this, like as we mentioned before, this is the ultimate test spell. Well, if you don't counter this, you can't counter anything. So, if BBD had, say, Liliana Dreadhorde General that could come down now, or if he had his own Teferi he could play to tuck the other Teferi, you're stranding your all of your instant speed spells in your hand as long as that remains in play. So Dovin's Veto does end up stopping.
So it makes this matchup pretty difficult for Brian. And you see Shahar starting to run away with this one a little bit, up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards in hand. Could be more if we jumpstart a Chemist's Insight, which we are. And there's a copy of Narset that's going to join the fray here in just a moment and tick down to add another card to Shahar's hand. Is right now, if you're Brian, you're trying to think, and you should be at home as well, is what is the best card that Brian can draw this turn? In every card of his deck, what is the best thing that he could draw, and could Shahar answer that? The answer, that's up for us to decide. I think it would be Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Shahar has an answer for that. Well, multiple, in 2 copies of Vraska's Contempt and Absorb. The later these games go, the worse it's going to be for Brian, and when we get to the sideboard portion of things, I presume we're going to see him shift his deck dramatically.
Yes, we do see the Mortify can attempt to take care of the Search for Iskanta, and the fact that the Teferi Time Raveler is in play means that there's no possibility for Brian to counter back, even if he had it. Does have D-Spark to take care of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. That does mean that Search for Iskanta, though, is going to flip. And now, just lots of opportunities for Shahar to go digging through his deck to find more action. There's another Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and this is, like you mentioned, a situation where BBD could probably pick the top cards of his deck and there wouldn't be a way out.
Yeah, and that's what makes the Esper control deck so good, is that once it actually gets its footing and is able to start activating its various card advantage engines, be it Narset, be it Teferi Time Raveler, be it Teferi Hero of Dominaria, or even a Search for Iskanta that transforms into Iskanta the Sunken Ruin, then it's just too much to come back from, because as you can see in Shahar's hand, we've played a ton of turns. How many cards does he have? 7. Might have enough to discard for his turn. Brian has a Glacial Fortress, and he gets to draw a card per turn. So the world is Shahar's oyster here. Unfortunately for Brian, this game is not going his way, but again, he is going to change his deck dramatically after sideboard. I have to imagine he's come prepared for this matchup, but game 1 is looking good for your 2-time world champion.
Absolutely. This is sort of all over except the crying, scooping, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, the formalities, as it were.
And it is worth noting that this version of Esper Control that Shahar is playing really only has the the Teferi emblem and Liliana as effective win conditions. You're going to either kill your opponent with a horde of zombies, or they're probably going to concede because you just have them locked up.
And that's really one of the nice things about Esper, right, is you don't really have to play very many win conditions. Esper Control, that is. Esper Midrange has to play Hero of Precinct 1 and Thief of Sanity and maybe a couple other odds and ends. But one of the nice things about Esper Control is that Teferi is its own win condition in and of itself in most matchups. And you throw in a Liliana, and all of a sudden, okay, I've got things taken care of. The goal when you're playing Esper Control is not die in the early stages of the game, because the longer we go, the better it is for me. And me in this instance is Shahar, and he is looking real good this game.
Yeah, I mean, 7 cards in hand, 2 Chemist's Insights in the graveyard, 3 Planeswalkers, Escanta the Sunken Ruin, another search for Escanta in play. This is like the embarrassment of riches. There's Liliana, so finally a way to actually do something other than generate advantages.
Yeah. You know, one thing that's actually been added to this Esper Control deck, too, that kind of, in a weird way, acts as a win condition is Oath of Kaya. And I'll mention that card because Oath of Kaya has the unique ability to actually deal 3 damage to any target. Any target could be BBD's face right there. He doesn't look as confident as he once did in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, I
He's
suppose.
just so steely-eyed.
I know.
Through all this.
Through these 4 Planeswalkers and a handful of cards, he's doing just fine. But the ability to actually play Oath of Kaya, deal 3 damage to your opponent, return it to your hand with Teferi, or return it to the top of your deck with the other Teferi, you know, you get some interesting interactions there where you can just deal your opponent 3 damage over and over and over again. But Liliana will play cleanup duty this game.
Yeah, Liliana comes down, makes a zombie. Teferi just continues to generate more card advantage alongside that Escanta as well.
Big draw step.
Finds Teferi.
You want to mention this interaction here?
Oh, yeah. The tick up from the Teferi Time Raveler allows Shahar to use the Thought Erasure during Brian Braun-Duin's draw step to force him to discard the Teferi before he even has a chance to cast it. That gets the concession.
We will take a look now at BBD's sideboard and the cards he's going to bring in, and more importantly, the cards he's going to take out, like Under the God Eternals, which doesn't really have any targets here. Hostage Taker, again, doesn't really have any targets here as well. So you're going to see some exchanges for some bad cards that don't really interact well against a control deck. Those are going out. Some good cards that actually interact well are going in, like Dovin's Veto. He's got 4 copies, Duresses as well. So he's able to change his deck to be a little bit better. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's certainly better than his Game 1 configuration.
Yeah, crucially, you know, he does have those Narset Parter Veils, which are cheap cards that he can play that give him a persistent advantage over a couple of turns. The fact that the Narset's passive ability, prevents your opponent from drawing multiple cards in a turn is very powerful in this matchup. It stops the card draw from Chemist's Insight. It stops the card draw from Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Yep. It stops the card draw just from any additional source. It doesn't stop the Narset itself because it's not an actual draw effect. It doesn't stop Search for Escanta, but it really can come down and because Shahar does not have any creature-based way to deal with it outside of, it looks like he's bringing his own Thief of Sanity, only a couple copies. It really puts a lot of pressure on him.
Now, you're going to note that Shahar is boarding on his Kaya's Wraths first. We're looking at a deck here from Brian that doesn't have that many creatures to begin with, but also is converting to a very Planeswalker-centric strategy after sideboard. So Kaya's Wrath, not ideal there. He's going to want to make sure he leaves enough answers in his deck to be able to take care of Hero of Precinct 1 and Thief of Sanity, but this is where BBD actually gets a little bit of an edge here, because you get to say, all right, well, Shahar, you have to walk the tightrope of being able to deal with these creatures and have that configuration of your deck, but still be able to do your thing. And as we know, and we've seen already today, if Hero or Thief of Sanity live for a couple of turns, it's bad news.
Yeah, though, I mean, both players kind of have to do that same dance here because they do know each player's list. They are fully aware of what is in each player's deck and sideboard. And the existence of Thief of Sanity in Shahar's sideboard means that if Brian decides to take out all of his creature removal, well, Shahar could just play a turn 3 Thief of Sanity and run away with the game.
Absolutely. So it's a little game of cat and mouse here between the two players, all based around Thief of Sanity because it is so incredibly powerful. Pardon me. Just one hit can change things in a very, very big way. So both these players are going to go back and forth in the sideboarding. They are bringing in similar elements, and their decks do look a little bit similar after sideboard. They are both Esper colors, of course, but you see Shahar is taking his time with the sideboarding because these are difficult decisions. I do think, Brian, that Game 1, Shahar is pretty heavily favored. That game, game, I think, is going to play that way a lot. Maybe not to that extreme, but I think it will go that way quite a bit. However, I think after sideboard, things get pretty good for Brian. Now, this is an interesting hand because you got these lands that are going to enter the battlefield tapped a bunch in Drowned Catacombs and Glacial Fortress, but you've also got 3 very powerful cards in Teferi and Thief of Sanity.
Yeah, any land that comes into play untapped allows you to play a turn 3 Thief of Sanity, which is quite strong, though looking at Shahar's hand, we do see that there's a Thief of Sanity as well. No Thought Erasure, which is one of the very important cards in the early turns because it can deal with any of the various threats that each player might bring to bear. There is possibility of just Swamp into Duress.
That's what we're going to see. You're going to see a hand of 2 Teferis. One of them is going to leave.
And this, importantly, does give Shahar the information about what's going on BBD's side. You know, he knows, okay, well, there's a Thief of Sanity coming down. I'm going to need to try to find a way to deal with it myself. Does not find anything still. So we may see just Thief of Sanity in blocking.
Yeah.
Rarely seen Thief of Sanity combat.
Shahar's draw is a Hostage Taker.
Hostage Taker is a very good draw for Shahar here. He does have the Thief of Sanity that comes down, threatening to block. D-Spark cannot remove Thief of Sanity. So Brian Braun-Duin is going to offer the trade here, effectively, saying, okay, you can block, and if you don't, I get a card. So I expect we will see the block. And does say go. And I like that attack from BBD. He knows that he doesn't have removal, and he doesn't know whether Shahar has removal. So he is essentially put in a position where he says, okay, we can make this exchange, or there's the possibility that you have removal and I get blown out. And frankly, he would have been in trouble against the Hostage Taker outside of that Spark.
Teferi Time Raveler will come down.
And Teferi Hero of Dominaria comes down for Brian Braun-Duin. And he's going to plus find himself another Thief of Sanity. But crucially, he does not have a Dovin's Veto. He has no way to stop this Teferi from coming down. He does have D-Spark, but can't cast it. Actually, Dovin's Veto wouldn't matter. There's still a Teferi.
There's a Teferi Time Raveler out there that's causing all sorts of trouble. That card is so powerful from War of the Spark, and it's on the battlefield. Starting to take over a little bit. Another Teferi here.
And crucially, Teferi can deal with Teferi. So the pair of Teferis for Shahar is much more powerful than the singleton Teferi for BBD. And reverse sends Teferi to deck. We do see the possibility of D-Spark on the Teferi Hero of Dominaria into a Thief of Sanity or a Narset. I'm curious to see which BBD does decide to play. Thief of Sanity is more powerful but more vulnerable.
Yeah, Thief of Sanity, the upside on this card is incredible because, if it does hit, it has a huge effect on the game. It's going to be the Thief. It's not going to live very long, as you see a handful of removal spells here for Shahar, with an Oath of Kaya, a Hostage Taker, and a Vraska's Contempt. Curious to see which way Shahar wants to take care of this creature. Thief of Sanity is going to be... That's going to be taken hostage here by the human pirate.
And this is a really big deal, because if BBD cannot remove the Hostage Taker, and he can't yet, he will Narset, and he can dig with the Narset. If he does not find a removal spell, not only he finds a Dispark, but he'd love to be able to take Teferi or Liliana. But here, if he does not take this Dispark and immediately remove the Hostage Taker, Shahar can cast the Hostage Taker that he is, or rather the Thief of Sanity that he's stolen with the Hostage Taker.
Yeah, but the question is, what's the higher upside play? And Brian believes the higher upside play here is Liliana Dreadhorde General, because Hostage Taker would come down, it would actually cast the Thief of Sanity, and then Liliana's minus can take care of the 2 creatures. So this means that Shahar can't make what was such an obvious and powerful play any longer, or at least we don't think so, as we head back to Shahar's turn.
Yeah, so from BBD's sort of thought process there, as you mentioned, was okay. Well, at least Liliana can deal with both of those. He is trying to put himself in a position where he's not just purely playing reactively, and he is threatening to put the pressure on with the Liliana itself as well. From Shahar's perspective, as you mentioned, he can't just play that Thief of Sanity now, because it would just get eaten up by Liliana because he doesn't have counter magic to stop it from coming down.
So it's curious to see how Shahar wants to move forward here, and that's why this game is actually slowing down a little bit. Shahar's got some thinking to do. He's going to start with Teferi, going to plus there. Now he'll move towards Thief of Sanity off of the Hostage Taker. Okay, land, and now we're going to see Narset get knocked down to 1. So then we're going to go back to Brian. We know Brian has Liliana. Everybody knows it. You know it. Shahar knows it. We know it. Becca knows it. Everybody knows. Here's Liliana. It's going to come down, if I had to guess.
What mode would you use?
If I had to guess,
I would use Kill That Thief of Sanity.
yeah, we're going to minus. Each player is going to sacrifice 2 creatures. So basically what this is, in my estimation, Brian, is Shahar saying, look, I got to get through this aspect of the game. This is going to happen. There's no way that this is not going to happen, so let's just let it happen. I have an answer to both Planeswalkers, and now I can move forward accordingly. Oath of Kaya is answer number 1. That's going to take care of Liliana.
Yeah, and we saw that he... Oh, actually, no, it's going to kill the Narset.
I'm a little surprised.
I am also surprised because I thought... Oh,
I am less surprised.
Yep, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And he wants to hold on to the Vraska's Contempt in the event that a Teferi Hero of Dominaria comes down.
Sure.
He would not be able... Ooh, or the second Liliana. This is actually Shahar being extremely careful with his resources and recognizing what the major threats are that Brian could have. And, a lot of players, I think, might have just snapped off Vraska's Contempt, not thinking about the Teferi Time Raveler plus Oath of Kaya interaction. That allowed him to kill both the Planeswalkers and save that Vraska's Contempt, crucially for this Liliana.
And this Vraska's Contempt will take care of this Liliana, so the powerful Planeswalker will be exiled. Shahar will gain a little bit more life. He's up to 28. There's still a Teferi Time Raveler on the battlefield. Cry the Carnarium will take care of the token, since it's not doing much else. However, as we take a look at both players' hands, not a ton going on here for Shahar, and Brian does have the ability to draw a good card. Mortify, not the best of the bunch, but I would say, Brian, that if we're looking at who's ahead here, it's close.
I do think it's close, but I think structurally Shahar is ahead because he has those Chemist's Insights he can draw into. He has, I think, more powerful individual cards. They're probably about even in terms of the powerful individual cards. But the ability for Shahar to find his is much higher at this stage of the game. He also just has the Teferi in play. And the Teferi means that so many of BBD's powerful cards are unlikely to be as impactful. If he picks up Dovin's Veto, that's done. But now there's Teferi on both sides.
Teferi is going to plus there for Brian. Part of the reason for that is if he were to minus it, maybe Oath of Kaya gets bounced again and finishes it off. So we're going to see Shahar bounce his Oath of Kaya and get to work on the Teferi.
Yep, Oath of Kaya does come down and get another card draw thanks to the Teferi minus ability. So BBD's Teferi does get chomped a bit. I guess stabbed. Chomped would be Soren. Stabbed is Kaya.
Whatever you want it to be their flavor, Judge.
I'm just trying to think about the best way to describe what's happening here. It's not chomped. Soren chomps things. Kaya stabs things. She's the ghost assassin. Ooh, that's a big draw, though. Teferi Hero of Dominaria comes down. And this is actually an interesting spot because BBD has that Dovin's Veto in hand. However, there's the Teferi Time Raveler in play for Shahar. So BBD could choose to tuck the Teferi Time Raveler so his Dovin's Veto is online to try to protect his Teferi. However, Shahar has a bunch of open mana. If he has a Vraska's Contempt, he could just play the Vraska's Contempt in response to this ability, so the Dovin's Veto would not be active anyway, because Teferi Time Raveler would still be on the board.
Cry the Carnarium, the draw, not ideal. Here's Hostage Taker, again not ideal. This game is shifting. Before, it was a Teferi advantage for Shahar every step of the way. Now BBD has the Teferi advantage here, and he's looking to make the most of it. Now Dovin's Veto is on. Teferi Time Raveler. Let's start with the big Teferi.
Yep.
Let's draw a card. Godless Shrine. Okay, sure. Let's go here. Minus, bounce the Hostage Taker. Let's draw another card. Another land there and drown Catacombs. So not the best 1-2 punch as far as draw steps are concerned, but Brian's going to get to untap a couple of lands, still have up Dovin's Veto, and we move forward accordingly. Hallowed Fountain the draw there for Shahar. Here's Hostage Taker. I like how this is looking for BBD.
Yeah, the stalemate they were at definitely went in BBD's favor here with the Teferi draw. And ooh, there's Hero of Precinct 1. There is a Cry of the Carnarium in hand for Shahar Shenhar, and he also has the Teferi Time Raveler on the top of his deck. So he can play the Teferi Time Raveler next turn and be ensured that his Cry of the Carnarium can at least go off if he really wants to ensure that he is getting rid of this Hero of Precinct 1. Dovin's Veto will take care of Teferi.
Yep.
So no guarantee that Cry will work. But I think this is probably the best window you're going to get if you want to get rid of that Hero of Precinct 1, because your opponent is just drawing additional cards every turn thanks to Teferi Hero of Dominaria.
And even if Cry does work in this scenario, if you're BBD, you're still feeling pretty good about things. which I think is pretty nice because you still have these two active planeswalkers kind of doing their thing, and Hostage Taker isn't that threatening right now. You're also looking at another copy of Teferi Time Raveler in hand and a Mortify to be able to kill something as necessary. So things are favorable here for Brian Braun-Duin. There's the cry. All right, we are going back to Brian. Another hero. One. Not bad. Teferi going to tick up a little bit more, draw another card here. This draw step is crucial. Just a Glacial Fortress, so not that great. Let's do the plussing of the other Teferi. Here's the hero of Precinct 1. Curious if we'll see the other Teferi be played. It looks like the answer is no. But again, I'm liking Brian's positioning here in this game. He has turned the corner nicely. Shahar needs to draw some pretty good cards, and the Eldest Reborn is
I was actually a little skeptical of the fact that Shahar not only kept in Eldest Reborn, but it looked like he brought in a second copy during sideboarding. Well, Eldest Reborn is definitely a powerful card. When you're playing against a deck with Hero of Precinct 1 that can make 1/1 tokens, you're playing against a deck with Narset Parter Veils that can just have a useless Planeswalker on the board. There's going to be a lot of instances where the Eldest Reborn doesn't really do that much, at least on initial spellcast. However, it still sticks around in the other chapters going to go off, and possibly give Shahar another, well, not with Mortify.
I think the nice thing about the Eldest Reborn in this matchup is Chapter 3, where you get to get something back. If you ever get to that point. If you're actually able to kill a Thief of Sanity with it, great. Hero of Precinct 1 is making it look quite poor in this instance. We're going to see a draw step Thought Eraser here, I believe, from Brian Braun-Duin because he plus Teferi Time Raveler. Wouldn't surprise me one bit. And here it comes.
Ooh, and it's going to hit the Narset. And that was a card that could have potentially dug Shahar out of this by finding some form of removal for the Teferi Hero of Dominaria.
That's a huge surveil to the top two in Dovin's Veto. That's a card that you're happy to draw. Draw steps are getting better here for BBD.
When you're behind to this degree in a game and your opponent scries or surveils to the top, it feels so bad. And there's another Thought Erasure. So Teferi Time Raveler giving Brian Braun-Duin another peek during the draw step with the Thought Erasure. So even any spell here gonna go away.
Take that Thought Eraser.
And the combination of Thought Erasure plus Teferi Time Raveler not only means that you can get rid of any sorcery speed effect before they can play it, but they can't play spells other than as sorceries. So you get everything. Another one.
Well, let's keep it
this
going,
is just
right?
A nail, and they just keep making 1/1s as well with the Hero of Precinct 1. This is just snowballing further and further. Narset means even a main phase draw of Chemister's Insight. Not going to work.
This is basically Time Walk making 1/1?
Yeah.
Is that what this basically is right now? It's pretty darn good.
There's a Sorin.
4 Planeswalkers, huh? Yeah, 4. We're all done.
And there's the concession from Shahar Shenhar. He knows when he is beaten, and it will be Brian Braun-Duin who is going to even up the series.
I think things get really good for Brian after sideboard. I really do. I think Game 1 is really bad for him, but all these Planeswalkers and this counter magic and this interaction is really, really good for him. He kept a hand that wasn't very explosive because he knows the games are going to go long, so it's important to make sure you hit your land drops. Thief of Sanity trading in the early stages of the game, Brian doesn't really have any removal, so attacking his into Shahar's makes a lot of sense. The longer we went, and I said this in Game 1, it favored Shahar. I'm not sure that's the case now against Brian. And you see Shahar's setup here too. Absorb, which was great in Game 1. Those are in the board.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's so many different angles that he's being attacked by, one of which is the Teferi Time Raveler, which can make that just an absolute dead draw. It's also just expensive. 3 mana.
You gotta worry about discard.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, too.
It becomes a lot less effective. I mean, I think that a lot of what we saw that game was just how powerful. Well, let's talk a little bit about the mulligan, then get back to that. We're going to see a mulligan here, then a keep from Shahar as he mulligans a 1-land hand. Does have a pretty solid 2-land hand with a Thought Erasure Teferi.
Boy, I like Brian's hand a lot, though.
Oh, yeah, Brian's hand is extremely powerful. He has the duress to lead off. He's going to be able to take the Thought Erasure, which is the only playable card from Shahar's hand, which I would expect we do see, but he has a lot of options. And this will allow him to play out that Hero of Precinct 1 without any opposition. But crucially, I think a lot of what we saw in Game 1 was how the diversity of threats in BBD's deck made it difficult for Shahar to really keep up. Shahar spent a lot of that game with, he had the Hostage Taker, he had the Cry of the Carnarium. Those were not answering the current threats. Those were anti-creature cards while he was losing to Planeswalkers.
Here is Narset, our first Planeswalker of game number 3. That is going to minus here. We'll see if Shahar gets a card here, but you know, Hero Precinct 1 is not a card I expect to win the early stages of a game, but it can win the early stages of this game because Kaya's Wrath is ideally out of Shahar's deck. Makes a lot of sense why he'd sideboard that out. We're not looking at a creature-heavy matchup, and now Brian is able to maybe run away with this because now we got 2 must-kill creatures in the battlefield here in Thief of Sanity and Hero of Precinct 1, which is going to knock Narset down to 1, which means it's not going to do very much for the rest of the game.
And Oath of Kaya is the draw, so
that's a big
at
one.
least, yeah, a land would have been great too with the Vraska's Contempt. Is going to take out the Thief of Sanity. And now, this is actually an interesting spot for Brian because he does have the Narset he could play, but he also has the Dovin's Veto he can hold up to try to protect his board here. The Oath of Kaya, proving to do some damage here against the attacking creatures. Ooh, Narset finds Liliana.
I like going straight to Liliana.
Yeah.
That other card there, I believe, was a Thought Eraser, and that card is very powerful in the matchup. Shahar really needs a 4th land. Found a copy of Search for his Kanta, so going to miss his 4th land drop. But taking that Liliana, we saw how powerful it was in that second game to get Brian back into it. It might run away with this one, and Thought Eraser is a huge find off of Narset as here comes the attacks.
Yeah, and BBD gets in the damage, falls with Thought Erasure, going to make yet another creature with the Hero of Precinct 1, and takes the only interactive card that can be played with even another land draw. So now he knows that there has to be exactly a counterspell off the top, or Liliana is going to be able to come down next turn.
Yeah, and
unanswered.
I love taking the Vraska's Contempt because it's an answer to things. Chemister's Insight when Narset's out there, not particularly good. Teferi, we're a little ways away from that. Liliana, we're a little ways away from that. So now we're going to head back over to Shahar, who found a
the
Duress.
Duress, but Dovin's Veto.
That's going to take care of that. And you get the 1-2 punch, right? You get Dovin's Veto, make a token, take care of the Duress, and now you've protected your Liliana, and you've got Mortify to take care of Search for his Kanta if it comes to that. BBD doing his thing right now.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Shahar is a little bit pinched on mana here, but Brian has just had such a powerful opening here that has been able to exchange his answers for all of Shahar's threats, all of his threats for Shahar's answers. So many ways that are really putting pressure on multiple angles.
Things have lined up beautifully here for Brian this game. You know, this is one of those games where, think about the last game where his first play, was Thief of Sanity into a much longer game. This one was 2, 3, 4.
Right.
You go Hero into Thief, into something else, force the action. Shahar's answers and mana did not line up correctly, and that's why BBD gets the W.
And I really think that we saw just the power of the proactive elements of what the mid-range deck does compared to the control deck. We saw in Game 1, well, the mid-range deck has a lot of these reactive cards that are poor in the matchup, and drawing those meant that he didn't really have stuff that really put the pressure on Shahar. But once those were out of the deck, and they were replaced by Duresses and Dovin's Vetoes, we saw just the Thief of Sanity, the Hero of Precinct 1, these must-answer threats, even that draw of the Moment of Craving toward the end. It's like, well, there's just still so many of the 1/1s that the hero already created. They're in play, let alone the Liliana that's on the battlefield.
And these are both such impressive players. In Game 2 there, where they both had both the fairies coming in and out, and it was just a minuscule little, which power am I going to use? Am I going to use the plus or the minus? And watching these incredible players deal with that is so interesting to watch, and Brian Braun-Duin did an incredible job.
I mean, one thing I love about Brian, he's a master of the mid-range. So think about that first game. We're going back and forth, but really it's a cakewalk for Shahar, right? And we're saying, okay, wow, this matchup might be really bad. And in best of 1, you may be right. But sideboard, he knew his plan right away. Let's get some of these bad cards out. Let's get some of these planeswalkers and discard spells in. And that's an area where Brian is so comfortable and has been winning that way for so long. He knows how he wants to sequence. He knows what he's trying to accomplish. I think back to that Narset activation where it was Liliana and Thought Eraser. You'd make an argument for both cards, right? Discard spell, surveil, set up future draws, make another token with Hero of Precinct 1. No. We're going to go all the way to the top. This Liliana's going to resolve. I've got Dovin's Veto for protection, and when I'm in this situation and he's already ahead a little bit, he's saying that Liliana doesn't need to catch me up. It's going to push me further ahead and win the game. And what's notable there is that he didn't even think very long about the decision. He knew where he wanted to navigate the game. He got there, and he got the win.
And I want to go back to how I was talking about how I read that article that BBD wrote about this deck.
Yep.
He said his sideboarding plan was groundbreaking, that it was take out the bad cards, put in the good cards.
I love
That's
it.
what we saw. That's what you saw him do.
That's right.
And it worked out really well.
It really did. That's all he had to do. You give him a sideboard, and he took those next 2 matches. So we're going to go to a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to see almost the entire match of Salvatto versus Shi Tian. So just stay tuned, and we'll be back in a few. Hey, welcome back to MPL Weekly. How you guys feeling?
So good. Are you kidding?
Oh,
So good.
I'm having a great time watching these matches. We just saw Brian Braun-Duin move on to the next level of the Pearl Division, and we have another Pearl Division match to jump into now. What do you guys think about, we've got Salvatto and Shi Tian coming up, and we're going to go straight to Game 3.
So Luis Salvatto, he's your reigning player of the year, beat Seth Manfield in a playoff. He can play a little bit of everything. Top finishes, most notably, is that Player of the Year, and he's playing Esper Control against Shi Tian, who is a Hall of Famer playing Azorius aggro deck I'm a big fan of, multiple-time Pro Tour top 8 competitor as well. Both players are great. That's the short version of it. We can get into a deeper version of it, but both are fantastic.
Yeah, Shi Tian really made a name for himself primarily playing Modern. He made the top 8 of, I think it was like 3 consecutive Modern Pro Tours. There's only one a year. He just kept making top 8 every single year, with a variety of different strategies, and really has advanced his gameplay even since then by working with a number of other players throughout the world, in addition to his sort of local region of Asia.
And let's jump into Luis Salvatto's deck list. What do we have with Esper Control?
Esper Control, the weapon of choice. You see the key cards. I think those are important to highlight based off of the match we just watched. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Teferi, Time Raveler. The thing about Esper Control, then we're going to mention it all day long here and probably over the next handful of weeks, that you can build it many different ways, but a lot of the key cards do remain the same. This time you're going to see 4 copies of Kaya's Wrath, where we've seen 3. You're going to see the 1 copy of Oath of Kaya that we saw in the last match on Shahar's side of things. You're going to find 4 copies of Thought Eraser, and I'm always on the check for the number of Teferi. It's 4 and 2, 4 for the big one, 2 for the small one. Absorbs is a 4 of. That number can vary. Main deck copy of Dovin's Veto, but the strategy, Brian, is tried and true. Kill all the stuff, eventually win.
Yeah, we saw exactly the same strategy from Shi Tian that we've seen before as well. The Azorius aggro deck, looking to kill you. You're trying to kill my stuff. Well, I'm trying to kill you.
Yep.
And looking to play out small creatures. Often get legions landing online to get a string of them continuing to come out. Resilient to removal, thanks to both the Legion's Landing and History of Benalia and Tithe Taker, giving you a little bit of resilience to those sweepers. But crucially as well, this is a white-blue deck. We saw the Dovin's Vetoes, and in the case of Shi Tian, he has Spell Pierce in his sideboard as well to give him more cheap interaction and ways to stop those sweepers and haymakers.
And everybody loves that Teferi Time Raveler, one of the breakout cards of War of the Spark.
Absolutely. Very, very powerful card.
I mean, just all the matches we've seen so far, have involved, or many of them have involved, the Fairy Time Raveler having a huge impact, whether it was, the draw step Thought Erasure turn after turn that we just saw from Brian Braun-Duin, or even just shutting off counter magic. It's been very powerful.
Well, folks, we're going to jump into Game 3. It's 1-1 so far. We're going to see who takes that third game away right now.
Sideboard cards will certainly play a role here. You see Lee's hand right now. He's going to keep, looks like just a 1-lander with a bunch of 1-drops, most notably Legion's Landing. I'm curious to see where he will start as he plays a Hallowed Fountain untapped. Going to fall down to 18. And I like starting on a landing, something we didn't see earlier. Yeah. Brian, I can let you get into why, because this is an important card.
Yeah, Legion's Landing is just very powerful against the control decks because not only does it give you the 1/1, that's not really a big deal, but the key thing is that it gives you the enchantment that remains in play that allows you to flip into Adanta the First Fort and just continue to generate more threats. Your opponent may have their removal spells for individual creatures, but they can't kill your land very frequently.
No second land there for Shi Tian, so we're going to go back over to Luis Salvatto at this stage of things. It's going to be a Thought Eraser. That's going to resolve not underneath the most pressure at this stage because of the Mistland drop. And you're going to see a hand there with Snubhorn Sentry, History of Benalia, Law Rune Enforcer. That's the new one, along with Tithe Taker and Venerated Loxodon. Oldies but goodies.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting options here. He has the Law Rune Enforcer is the only castable card, thanks to the mana situation. He could take the Venerated Loxodon to prevent an explosive board being generated, but does decide to take the Law Rune Enforcer. And I think part of the reason for that is actually looking at his hand, one of his sideboard cards that's there. He has the God Eternal Kefnet in his hand. And that, looking at your opponent's hand, knowing, oh, well, you have no way to get rid of this big flyer, means that he can actually just block these small creatures and try to keep himself afloat that way.
Second land has been drawn, and it looks like you might be going the old Snubby instead of Tithe Taker. I'm a little surprised by that.
Yeah, that's particularly interesting to me because not only is it just not mana efficient, playing the Tithe Taker would use his 2 mana, get him more power in play rather than 0. It's not like he's holding up mana for anything. And also, Yeah, I'm just trying to parse why you would choose to play the Snubhorn Sentry here in particular.
So you can make the argument, right, of you're bluffing Spell Pierce with this mana
Sure.
open because you haven't seen the card that was drawn. You're leaving him Hallowed Fountain. The big question for me is what are you Spell Piercing on 3?
Well, but you just got Thought Erasured.
You did. You did get Thought Erasered, and your draw step was...
a land.
It was a land. So Salvatto's working with perfect information.
Yeah, you
so you're not
can't be
bluffing anything. Yeah, so you're not actually bluffing anything. Maybe a misstep there from Shi Tian. We'll have to see because Snowporn on this battlefield not particularly good. So the Legion's Landing token, that little vampire is going to finish off Teferi Time Raveler. I would be shocked if we don't see History of Benalia this turn because we've got to work towards the city's blessing. And so there is the powerful enchantment. That's going to be 2 permanents. We're getting a little bit closer for old Snubby.
Yeah, definitely drawn out of this slow start pretty well with the 2 additional land, but we see the God Eternal Kefnet does come down. 4/5 flying creature with a pretty powerful passive ability as well, and there's no way for Shi Tian to remove this right now. So
there's no way to get the 4/5 off the battlefield. So here's the plan.
You can build a big board.
You can build a big board, and that's exactly what he's going to work towards doing. Step 1 is this Glacial Fortress. That should be permanent number 10 for City's Blessing to make the Snubhorn into a 3/3. So you see our little dinosaur friend is ready to get into the attack zone against a 4/5. Not a favorable fight for the Snubhorn. However, 3 creatures are eligible to attack, which is important for Legion's Landing the longer this game continues to go. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Shi Tian actually working towards transforming that land, which will give him additional mana to play a lot of spells this particular turn. But there are a lot of decisions to be made on this turn. It's not as easy as I'm trying to make it sound.
And neither was his previous turn, just sort of thinking back. I think that the Snubhorn Sentry gave him a little bit more resilience to Cry of the Carnarian.
Absolutely.
There's only a single copy that is in the sideboard of Luis Salvatto's deck. But I think that Shi Tian was trying to position himself such that he had at least a board that wasn't completely wiped if it happened to be there for Salvatto.
What else is also very interesting about this turn too, Brian, is that it's not as simple as just attacking and maybe throwing your Snubhorn away to transform the Legion's Landing. You can make the argument of, I play Tide Taker, I play Dauntless Bodyguard, I play Venerated Loxodon, all my stuff's in the battlefield, and if you don't have Kaya's Wrath, I don't really care about that 4/5. I can overwhelm it and still transform Legion's Landing. So Lee is thinking about a lot of things. Maybe he overthought the last turn, and he's thinking a ton on this turn because there's a lot to take into account here.
Yeah, definitely going through all the possible permutations, and even if you do decide, okay, I'm going to play Venerated Loxodon, what are you buffing with your Venerated Loxodon?
Absolutely.
What are you tapping to put +1/+1 counters on with the Convoke?
So it looks like we might be going to combat. Okay, so we are. So everybody's going to get into the attack zone. There's your transformation of Legion's Landing into a Danto the First Fort. Unsurprisingly, God Eternal Kefnet's going to eat our favorite dinosaur, so 3 damage is going to come through. Salvatto's going to fall down.
Maybe.
Man, maybe it is.
I'm more of a Galta fan.
Yeah, well, to each their own. Here is Tithe Taker. This is going to be a Dauntless Bodyguard, and conveniently that means there's plenty of mana available and creatures to convoke the Venerated Loxodon. So everything's on the battlefield. All these creatures are getting a little bit larger, and Tithe Taker's got relevant text, and History of Benalia is going to go off next turn. Kaya's Wrath would be a really good draw.
And
not quite it.
Teferi. So Tyrant Scorn or Teferi. There's two different Teferis that could be played here. You can play Tyrant Scorn and Small Teferi,
yes,
which allows him to bounce something and then kill something with the Tyrant Scorn, or just bounce, depending on what he's going to be targeting.
And assuming his mana cooperates, which I believe it will in this instance. So there's a swamp.
Yes. Yeah, he has 2 blue-white lands, 2 blue-black lands. So Teferi Time Raveler will come down. I expect that we will see this bounce.
The bounce question is interesting, right? Because you have to take in History of Benalia's Chapter 3 into the equation. So I think it's easiest to bounce the Knight tokens.
Yeah.
Godless Shrine, the draw off of the Teferi minus activation. Then Tyrant Scorn is actually something that you're going to want to play on your turn.
Oh,
no.
Dear. Yeah, the Tithe Taker means that Tyrant Scorn is not playable during Shi Tian's turn.
A misstep.
So the tax, perhaps a misstep there because, yeah, that will prevent him from being able to take down anything from Shi Tian here. And
you are free to play Gideon's Blackblade now, too, because Dovin's Veto also cannot be cast. A surprising misstep from your reigning player of the year, but a misstep nonetheless. Here is a Gideon Blackblade, powerful new Planeswalker.
Now you can give something indestructible. Can potentially make the one of the creatures he wants to attack in with indestructible, so there's no opportunity for Kefnet to block and kill it.
Might be very attractive to keep this Tithe Taker alive. It looks like it is. So Tithe Taker is indestructible at this stage. We're going to be going on into the attack step. Oh,
all of them.
That's where they should always go, people. Right to the face. No, boo. Leave that Teferi alone.
Well, so interestingly, there has to be a block on a five attack creature rather. I think this is just lethal. Period.
I think we are looking at lethal, right? Because I think Salvatto is coming to. He's coming to realization of the mistake that he has made.
Yeah,
that is it.
Wow,
everybody.
I do feel like that was a pretty big misstep from Salvatto, not using his Tyrant Scorn on his own turn, allowing himself to be taxed out by the Tithe Taker, and allows Shi Tian to take the game.
Lee did it! Yes, well done for Lee, which is your favorite deck right now.
Oh, I love attack.
Always.
Well, look, white aggressive strategies.
Your favorite deck for the past 10 years.
That's me. I think the shirt is both white and blue, if memory serves.
It's there.
So here's the thing I'll take away from that match. Obviously, it's back and forth, and the Azorius aggro versus Esper control match is very, very close. But as you're watching 31 of the very best Magic players play Magic, even the best make mistakes sometimes too. Magic is a very complicated game. There's a lot going on. And in most instances, is Luis Salvatto going to make that mistake? No. But in that instance, he did. And now he's probably, you saw that pause. You saw that pause. It was like, Tyrant, no, I can't cast it. I can't cast it. And that's a game-losing mistake. In a tournament like this and a league like this, it's so important not to make those.
Well, and with Arena, it just skips it. You don't even have the window to try. You're like, it's like, no, you can't. It's just like, oh, whoa, that just went into play. I couldn't cast my toe. Oh, that's what that means.
Yeah, it's brutal. And that's a brutal misstep.
It adds the mana to the card in your hand just to rub in your face.
But it's only it doesn't happen until it's your opponent's turn. So you don't know until that happens.
Until you know.
Oh. Yeah. Oh.
Congrats, Luis Salvatto. Congrats to the player of the year. A tough loss, obviously, but for Shi Tian with this particular build of the deck, that play with the Snowboard Century looked a little strange on the surface, but I think also just saying, I want to get this thing going as fast as I can, maybe makes a little more sense than I think we initially let on. Yeah.
Well, let's move on. We're going to do a quick recap of 2 more games in our Pearl division, and the next is Rolf versus Froehlich. And here's their head-to-head.
Ooh, it's not. We don't know who won yet. I can't use my
Oh, you have to play. You have to play fair now. There we go.
Well, the people in the booth learned after letting you win.
Curses.
John Rolf, Midwest player. Coming off of you're going to find just one top finish as opposed to Eric's 5. We'll get to Eric in a moment. John Rolf top 8ing a Pro Tour with red-based strategies. He's had so much success with red-based strategies. Not surprised to see him playing mono red here. However, free throw. I am surprised to see Azorius aggro. I don't know what I was going to put him on. I know you've played with Eric for a very long time. I know he's got a pretty wide range of things to do. But perhaps he, like many others here, feel as though Azorius aggro very, very good.
I mean, we have seen Azorius aggro perform extremely well so far in this event, though we have mostly seen it perform extremely well against Esper Control. And now, going against mono red aggro, you're a little bit more vulnerable to the removal effects they have, to Goblin Chain Whirler. And we even see that John Rolf, he has chosen to go with kind of the old school version of this deck. There's only 4 Experimental Frenzies, no copies of Chandra Flame Artisan. And if anything, that version of the deck I feel like is better against the white decks because it has the explosive potential from those big Frenzy turns.
Now, if you're new to this, Becca, I know you're working yourself into Magic a little bit here as we go. This is how you can make a deck list.
Four.
All 4s.
Well, there's a that can't be a 1.
That Wizard's Lightning is a 4.
That math doesn't make sense.
And then
there it is, just hiding behind the flames.
Yeah, and then a big 20. For 20 basic mountains. This is how you build a deck. John Rolf, talk to me, baby. I love it.
I'm enjoying playing this deck myself, but I noticed there's no War of the Spark in here.
Correct.
There is no War of the
Spark.
It ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's true. That's true. John likes this build of the deck. He's got his key cards, and Runaway Steam and Experimental Frenzy, which conveniently work very, very well together. And again, as Brian mentioned, with Experimental Frenzy as opposed to Chandra, which we saw last week and have so much success in Richmond. Frenzy, especially in this matchup, it's difficult for the white decks to remove it. They only have a couple of answers, and then it just goes absolutely nuts.
Yeah, Froehlich here.
Yeah.
Pretty run-of-the-mill. I take that back. There's a couple of changes here because you have access to so many different 1-drops. Lean and Vanguard making it into Eric's build of the deck, not a card you see a ton of. The 2-drop instead of Tithe Taker, you're seeing a Danto Vanguard, which is not advantageous in this particular matchup. Teferi Time Raveler, that's a 4 of here, where we've seen some players play 2 main deck or none in their main deck, and then Unbreakable Formation, which is a nice one of in best of 1. I'm not sure how good it is in best of 3, but Eric opting to play 1 copy.
I do think the specific card choices in Eric's deck does does make him a bit weaker against the red deck as well.
I agree.
He isn't playing Snubboard Sentry. He is playing 4 copies of Lean and Vanguard, which is only a 1/1. Going to die to Chain Whirler. The Unbreakable formation can be pretty powerful if you do manage to get a board already, but that's what red excels at doing, is stopping that from happening. So I do think that in this particular matchup, especially based on the build that Eric has chosen, that I would go with John Rolf as having that.
You think Rolf? Okay, who do you think?
I have to go with Rolf as well here. And there's also something to note too, Brian, that you may have missed, and I just caught right now. I'm doing the search there for Conclave Tribunal.
Oh, there's none.
To take care of Experimental Frenzy. So once a Frenzy hits the battlefield, it's there for good. Look, things can happen. We have to watch the games unfold, but man, I can't. It's tough for me to imagine John losing.
Unfortunately, we don't get to watch the games.
We're not going to watch this one. We're just going to find out with this next winner screen right now.
Okay. And extrapolate from there. So...
Wow! Surprise victory!
Okay.
With the
all right. Do we have
Azorius.
the... What was the game count? I'm curious what the game
I hope we can find that out, because it had to go to I mean, it doesn't have to go to
2-0.
What?
It had to go to 3? No,
Well, here, they can
didn't.
just take this.
That was
back, 'cause
just
I don't know. I don't
two
know
games.
anything. No, I'm shocked. I'm legitimately surprised by that, because I agree with you. His build with the lean in makes him worse against Chain Whirler. His deck is not good against Experimental Frenzy, but one of the things about white-based strategies that I love is sometimes you just kill him.
It's true.
Sometimes you just kill him.
Well, I mean,
Depends on that
if there
draw.
isn't a Chain Whirler, if there's just a slightly awkward draw, you can just snowball so quickly with the white deck, as you know.
Yes.
Sometimes you just kill them no matter what happens.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've also got Dominguez and Cuno that we're going to see there head-to-head right here.
Javier, he's a reigning world champion. He's coming off a top 8 at Mythic Championship 2 in London. Of course, that was a modern event where he played Is It Phoenix, which is arguably the best deck in modern. So congratulations to him on that accomplishment. And also, he's a world's runner-up. So he went 2nd place into 1st place, which is a heck of an accomplishment in and of itself. Playing mono white this particular week of the league, and for Andrew Cuneo, well. He looks cold as he hugs himself there.
He does kind of look like he's shivering.
But he loves a control strategy based around Glacial Fortress, so being cold is perhaps appropriate for him. Esper Control continues to be popular, and if you are going to figure out, or you're coming into this and you're saying, well, I wonder what some people are going to play. Look, Cuneo is actually one of the easier ones to actually pinpoint. He loves control strategies, he always has, and he's so good at playing them that I wouldn't be surprised if he just was going to any tournament saying, hey, here's my deck list right in front of you, good luck trying to beat me. Oftentimes the answer is, you can't.
Yeah, Andrew Cuneo sort of first rose to prominence in the sort of Magic community playing Cuneo Blue, which was a mono blue control deck way back in the day. We see he started in 1994.
Yep.
And he's very well known for playing controlling strategies. No surprise whatsoever to see the Esper Control as his deck here.
I am a little surprised at mono white deck. I hope
Yeah.
you have a deck
Yeah, I
list.
was just going to say, is this our only mono white that doesn't have a little splash of blue in there? I think it might be.
I believe so. I believe this is the only pure mono white aggro deck we see as we see it. Is again, almost a work of art. There's a 1X in there.
Two
And a
1Xs.
Yeah, 2 1Xs and a 2X. He almost got the memo that you had out there.
So we got the 20 planes, we got plenty of forms, but again, this is going to be a little bit different than Eric Froehlich's list that we saw and other deck lists as well. The nice thing about the white-based aggressive strategies is you can kind of mix it up a little bit. So Conclave Tribunal, 4 of them. Efro had 0, but Efro won, so maybe he was right. Who knows? Snubhorn, only one of those. A Johnny, which is a little expensive for this deck, one of those. But one card that's really starting to make its way into this deck is Law Rune Enforcer. The ability to have a 1/2 turns itself into a 2/3, which gets out of the range of various removal spells. And that tap ability can be very relevant in some matchups, I think is a key addition across the board for mono-white aggressive strategies.
I feel like in this matchup, though, the fact that he is mono-white rather than Azorius does have 4 copies of Law Rune Enforcer, very low impact card against Esper Control, and 4 copies of Conclave Tribunal. It's okay, it can deal with it at Teferi, but you mostly want to be on the offense. When you draw hands full of Conclave Tribunal, that's how you lose.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, let's see what Cuneo brought, that master of the Esper Control.
I'm very curious to see what his build is again, because these can vary quite a bit. He's got 3 Kai's Wrath, so as the aggressive player in me, I'm looking for the mass removal. 3 Kai's, 2 Cries.
2 Cries, 3, yeah.
So that's notable. And then he's got 1 Oath, 2 Eldritch Reborn, which aren't that great against white strategies. Moment of Craving, 2 of those, 2 Mortifies, some main deck discard, and 4 Thought Eraser and a Duress. And then he's got 6 Teferis as well. It's a 3/3 split as opposed to 4/2. Those numbers are going to vary week to week, I'm sure. And a little bit of main deck counter magic. Brian, I am with you. I think that this is going to be pretty difficult for Javier, but I think we just did this song and dance.
We did. I mean, and again, to be fair, there are, of course, draws the white deck can have where it sort of explodes the board. Maybe you don't find Cry of the Carnarium early. Maybe you don't find Kai's Wrath at all. Maybe your hand is full of Eldest Reborns and Duresses and Negates, and your opponent just runs you over.
All right, well, these boys think it's going to be Cuneo. Let's see who the winner was. victory. Oh,
right.
there it is.
All right.
Okay, you got first one wrong, but next one right. And Cuneo got 2-0.
Hey, I got the first one right. I predicted Brad won.
Okay.
Oh, whatever.
No, that's not the words you said.
Whatever.
But maybe you thought it.
I said Brad Nelson won when the very first one.
Okay, that's true. Yep.
But in the first one, in
'Cause you
this,
cheated.
yeah, because he cheated.
I
You
used
said-
the information that was at my disposal.
Yeah, when we're playing fair, we're actually guessing.
You
we're,
just disclose that first.
yeah, we're doing okay. You're batting 50-50 on this round, I
Well-
would say.
Fair enough.
Let's take a peek at the whole division board. This is Pearl Division. Now, remember, if you're just joining us, one of these players, after 5 weeks, is going to get a bye to the top 16 of the next Arena Mythic Invitational. So that's very exciting.
And in addition to that, all these players are earning mythic points
Yes.
as they get each of their wins per week. So it's not just the top player who has anything to fight for. Those mythic points will be used to rank the players throughout the year. And exactly what that means, we don't know yet, but you always want more of them.
Yeah, well, more information coming, obviously, but you can take a look at the wins and the losses very quickly. BBD, Ifro, Andrew Cuneo, and Shi Tian pick up the W. Shahar, John Rolf, Javier Dominguez, and Luis Salvatto picking up losses thus far. Still plenty of Magic and weeks to be played, and we're going to, I'm sure, have some more fun matchups in our Pearl standings in our Pearl group next week, so I'm looking forward
Let's
to
go
that.
look at it right now. Let's see these head-to-heads. So next week, Salvatto versus Cuneo. And yet to be known what their decks will be. They can change them in between these games we've seen today and next week. Shi Tian against Javier Dominguez.
That should be a really, really good one.
John Rolf versus Brian Braun-Duin.
Two players who I'm sure have played against each other in many a Grand Prix, so that should be a nice little rematch, and then this one's a delight.
Shahar Shenhar and Eric Froehlich.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that match. Both these players, they know each other very, very well. They've practiced together in the past, and I'm curious to see how that one plays out.
Yeah, the Pro group's interesting. I don't know who to pick as a favorite from that group just yet, and we've got a bunch more weeks to see how things are going to unfold. But it's really hard to pick a favorite. It seems like there's a lot of equal skill. I know Javier is your reigning world champion, and Luis Salvatto is your reigning player of the year. But they both have losses, so it's tough to pick a winner out of that
I
group.
mean, you can't be a big favorite in a tournament with this many.
No, you really
this many
can't.
incredible
You
players.
really can't.
All of these players have earned their spot here, and they're a lot of incredible talent in this group.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see what we have coming up. We have games all afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world. But I hope you all stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to jump into our Ruby division.